Money might get in the way of friendship. It's never been so expensive to celebrate life's milestones, right? One person's wedding could effectively wipe out your disposable income for that year. And she said, no, I would find it really annoying if all my friends were bootstrapped by their parents.
What happened? You still have the Monica wedding fund, don't you?
Honestly, if your friends are constantly broke, maybe you need better friends. Did someone really write that?
Hey, Phoebes. Shh. How about we'll each just pay for what we had, okay? It's no big deal.
Not for you.
Those financial divisions within friendship groups, in your 30s, it starts to sort of become obvious. Economic connectedness was one of the strongest indicators of social mobility there was. Well-being isn't just something you feel inside. It's how you compare yourself to others. I think this is super interesting, is there's a gender difference. Men think in terms of Premier League. It's all about who's first, second, third, fourth, and it's all about that ranking. And women think in terms of security. I think there's different status gains happening with the Millennials and Gen Z. It's not about who's got the most money. Quite often now it's about who's got the most freedom, who's got the most creative career, who's got the most time with their children. I think friendship is the sphere in which all of that should dissolve and not matter. Hey, welcome to It's a Relative with Dr. Eliza Philby, helping you understand the socio-economic trends that are governing your lives. And this week we're talking about friendship and money, and how money might get in the way of friendship. So this week I have been, I spent 36 hours in Amsterdam, which sounds way more glamorous than it was. As with any kind of business travel speaker event, you spend most of the time in the airport and on the plane and never actually see the city. And I didn't, but it was a really interesting conference because it was a food conference and there were chefs from all over the world. Unilever were hosting and I had a freaking great time tasting food mostly, but I was speaking about the family economy and the changing kind of conditions and expectations of the hospitality sector. But anyway, we're not talking about food. We're not talking about hospitality. We're talking about friendship this week. And I think over the last 10 years, there's been like this whole narrative around the rise of loneliness and the decline of friendship and the decline of real world interaction and connection as opposed to the rise of digital interaction and connection, and how different obviously those two things are. But I want to come at it from a slightly different angle and address a taboo, which is what role that money plays in friendship and how that might be slightly different for Millennials and Gen Z than it was for Gen X and Boomers. Let's get into it. Now, friendship, of course, should be the one space or arena in life where money doesn't play a part. And I would imagine by and large, it doesn't. But I think we need to sort of assess and address the way in which money potentially is playing a role in your friendships like never before, and is particularly evident amongst Gen Z and Millennials for reasons that will become clear. Because I think, first of all, we should state that it's never been so expensive to celebrate life's milestones, right? Take someone's wedding, for example. That could involve an outfit cost, travel, accommodation, present, maybe a stag and hen party. One person's wedding could effectively wipe out your disposable income for that year. And I do think that's actually why people getting married have increasingly looked to smaller weddings and in nearer cities. But I digress. The point here is that in an age of economic uncertainty and constraint, money may be seeping into our friendships more than ever. So when I was writing Inheritocracy, which is available to buy in all good bookstores, I had an interview with this girl who was she was a consultant, and she was earning really good money. And I was asking her about her dependency or not. She didn't have the support of bank of mum and dad. And I was asking her about how that potentially plays a role in her friendship groups. And she said, you know, I just consider myself extremely fortunate that I don't have rich friends. And I was like, ooh, unpick that for me, because that's interesting. It's not something, that's not a phrase I would use. And she said, no, I would find it really annoying if all my friends were bootstrapped by their parents. And she was making a clear distinction between friends that, you know, were earning high salaries, and she was really proud of their progress and that being one sort of clear income divide within our friendship groups. And then on the other hand, friends that potentially were incredibly reliant on their parents and whose sort of financial wealth and stability and support was very much buttressed by their parents. And she said that she actually couldn't, she was being honest with herself, like she didn't want to be surrounded by basically nepo babies. And I think that's probably being open about something that a lot of us are not open about, which is the role that money plays in friendships, and how there's probably a greater tension within that friendship group if some are bankrolled by the bank of mum and dad and some are not. But she was in her 20s, I'm in my 40s, and I can see how money and friendship sort of evolves as we go sort of deeper down the path of life. Because I remember, you know, in my 20s, we were all broke. Even if some of us had support systems and safety nets that others didn't, we were all essentially broke. And there was a sense of solidarity that we were all broke. And we were all sort of making our way up the rungs of the ladder, right? But noticeably in our 30s, there was startings of a division between those who, you know, got a deposit for a house miraculously through a direct debit from their parents, or like went into a certain profession and were really beginning to reap the rewards in their salary, or, you know, someone like me who'd follow their passion but were supported by in terms of London accommodation from their parents. Like there was definitely those divisions starting to there was a massive division between those that were in London and out of London, for example, as well. So in your 30s, it starts to sort of become obvious. And then in your 40s, definitely you start to begin to see that at play. And then in your 50s, I see people in their 50s now, you know, some that have retired, some that haven't, some that have got divorced, some that are very much crippled by the cost of social care and looking after their elderly as well as their children. So you're beginning to see that. And I think for millennials and Gen Z who are like on 35-year mortgages and 40-year student loan repayments, those financial divisions within friendship groups are possibly going to be there well into our 60s even. There's going to be friendship within friendship groups, some that are going to retire in their 60s and some that may not actually be able to retire until they're 80. There's a depressing thought. I think actually because Gen Z are much more open about money, they're probably much more open within their friendship groups about that financial division between those that have student debt, those that don't, between those that have the ability to stay at the hotel of mum and dad and those that don't. But also, I think there's a kind of underlying sort of dimension here that no one really wants to talk about, which is the decline of cross-class friendships. It's all relative. It's the mug. We have branded goods here, and it's reflective of the fact that I have a weekly Substack called It's All Relative out every Friday, and as you can see, we also have a weekly YouTube show out every Wednesday. Please do go over to Substack, subscribe. You'll get everything for free, no paywall, and I'd love it if you could comment, like on any of the posts. So although Gen Z are much more alive to the financial divisions within their friendship groups, they're also far less likely to be friends with someone of a different class than their parents were. And I think one of the major reasons for this is university, for example. That is already, if you're at university, a social sifting mechanism, right? Those that go, those that don't. And then within university, if you graduated before 2010, you may have a slightly rose-tinted view of what university is actually like as this sort of melting pot where everyone from all different worlds come together. It's bullshit. You have seen over the last really 15 years the rise of hierarchies when it comes to accommodation at university. And so you, in many cases and in many university towns, not just in the UK, but around the world, you get a stratification of accommodation. And so, you know, the rich kids are in the really nice block near the faculty building, and the poorer kids are way outside of town, you know, having to get their bus to lectures. And so you have this social stratification around the cost of accommodation that was there a bit in the 90s and noughties, but it's totally intensified over the last 10 years. And what that's meant is the decline of cross-class friendships at university. But actually, there was an amazing study done analysing Facebook connections and Facebook friendship groups in the US. This study analysed 72 million friendship groups. I mean, the most extraordinary study. And they found that economic connectedness, i.e. cross-class friendships, were more important mechanism of social mobility than what school you went to or a determiner of outcome more than what family structure you came from. And so the extent to which rich and poor individuals were socially interlinked was one of the strongest indicators of social mobility there was. And in this era of social media, we tend to assume that, I think, influencers are the main point of comparison, and quite a negative one, of course, and has kind of overtaken friends as the reference point for comparison of how we sort of see our lives, right? The truth is, we now look to our immediate friendship circle more than ever. We used to look to our community. Well, that's decimated. We used to look to our neighborhood, our road. Yeah. We used to look to our sort of immediate social circle, particularly at work. But all of those forms of association and connection have actually declined, right? And our friendship groups, although we've seen a decline of friendship, is still the mainstay and point of comparison.
Hey, Phoebes. Shh. How about we'll each just pay for what we had, okay? It's no big deal.
Not for you.
Okay, so actually psychologists have got a word for this, right? And that is subjective well-being. And that's the sense of how we're doing in respect to others, our friends. And in other words, well-being isn't just something, you feel inside. It's actually outward, how you feel in comparison to others. So there's such a thing as downward comparison, right? That's observing friends in worse circumstances can actually bring you reassurance, relief, and well-being. But there's also the opposite, which is upward comparison, which can bring decline in a sense of well-being, because you're comparing yourself to others in a better situation than you. And, I think, gosh, when we think about this, I like to think, how fallible are we, and frankly, how awful the human race is. But we are almost predisposed to compare ourselves and rank ourselves within our friendship group. It's therefore really interesting. It's not that there's an absolute amount of money that will bring you happiness, or an absolute amount of material things, or even stage in life or success in career or time. It's how you compare yourself to others, which is the root of how you assess your own well-being, success, journey, as it were. But there's a really interesting, I'm going to answer your questions in a minute, because I think this is super interesting, is there's a gender difference. So men are much more likely to rank themselves than women in respect to friendship groups, okay? Men think in terms of Premier League. It's all about who's first, second, third, fourth, and it's all about that ranking. And women actually are less likely to think in terms of rank, and much more to think in terms of security and what she needs in terms of long-term requirements. And I think this gender difference really explains why men are better at asking for pay rises than women, because men are thinking, how am I paid in respect to other people around me doing the same job? Women are thinking, how much do I need as a salary in order to get long-term security? Okay. And of course, men ask for more pay rises than women. And I think that's key to the answer. But anyway, let's go straight into your questions, because this is slightly blown up, this one. And some of these comments are really nice and some of them are frankly awful. My mum hates this book, but I think you'll love it. It's part autobiography, part sort of social analysis of the rising phenomena of the bank of mum and dad. And I pick apart my own dependency on the bank of mum and dad, and also interview loads of other people that have had very different life experiences. Some loads of money from their parents, some none, some charging interest, in all parts of the world in the UK. And it's full of data, it's full of insight, and it's been described as a mashup between Dolly Alderton novel and The Economist. So I kind of feel like, if you haven't heard of it, where have you been? But also, if you haven't bought it, please do. And also, I can recommend the audiobook, which is on Spotify and is narrated by me. And I really enjoyed actually reading the book as much, probably more than I did actually writing it. Inheritocracy, out in paperback and audiobook now. Okay, so I feel like I'm constantly trying to keep up with my friends financially. It's exhausting. Everything now is so expensive. And I think I've talked a lot about how families need to be honest about talking about money. And I think what I'm saying here is that friends need to be much more open about what they can afford. And, you know, whether it's like a spa day or getting your nails done together or even a night out or even, you know, cooking at home, like be really clear about your limitations and what is, you know, doable that month. And I think it can sometimes be incredibly awkward. But I think if they're true friends, they'll understand. I mean, this is the point, isn't it? Is that money may be infiltrating friendships, but true friendships, not frenemies, true friendships can get over any of that. Honestly, if your friends are constantly broke, maybe you need better friends. Did someone really write that? I just don't hang out with people who can't afford the same things. It's easier. I mean, are you judging your friends by what they can afford? That's kind of weird. Why should I feel bad if I've got more help from my parents? I mean, you shouldn't feel bad, but I think you should feel empathy for those that don't have that, or certainly an awareness. I think we talk too much about empathy. I think a lot of it's bollocks. I think like maybe sort of, and no one wants sympathy, but I think people want acknowledgement, and acknowledgement of privilege I think is really important. And I think, you know, frankly, everyone in the West is privileged. So I think there's limits to what you should do and what you can say. But I think there is a point at which we do need to kind of recognize that might be great for you, but there are others around you that don't have that. And again, it goes back to this point that the basis of friendship is not money. It's about, you know, having those bonds that is not based on status. Friendships shouldn't be based on status games. And therefore, if they're true friends, they won't care. And if you are a true friend, you will be really subtle and conscious and sensitive to it. Sensitive to that difference, I think is the point. Damala, you were nodding when I was saying men think in terms of Premier League.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there is competition usually, even amongst group of friends. Like I can think of some of my friends. I mean, a lot of it can be healthy, but then it's still sort of like, oh, did you get that job? Okay, I need to get a similar job, or I need to be better than that. So I have friends who are obviously like they're into production, and this plays out a lot in terms of the gears that we've got. So if I buy a new camera and I've upgraded the camera, and then another videographer friend of mine will say, "Oh, that camera is nice," and then just
Is that
3 months later, it's like he's got, you know, a better camera.
Do you know there's this whole thing on social media about how you are who you surround yourself with? Yeah. Have you heard this whole theory of like surround yourself with achievers and rich people and you know, successful people, and you just by default will become successful. And I'm like, yeah, but they won't know who you are. Like it's the basis of friendship is, in my view, to take the piss out of you and to bring you down and to make you feel grounded and to feel that full connection of knowing the good, the bad, the ugly of your life. Now that is maybe a uniquely female thing. And I have friends that, you know, my best friend stayed last night. I've known her since I was 10. She knows. She's cleaned up my sick. I've cleaned up her sick. Like, you know, she's seen every part of me the good, the bad, the ugly. And she's been there at all the key moments of my life. And we can sit and we just laugh about that. And her life as well. I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm laughing because we spent last night mostly laughing. We're not sitting there comparing equipment.
Yeah, it's
I think men do that. I think men, it's all about like banter in the present. I think women talk in their friendship groups quite often talk about the past and talk about the future. I don't know. Like female friendships is much more about sort of bigger context.
Yeah, I think so. I think with men as well, it's kind of like you can see it as aspirational, that competition.
Yes.
And that all, hang around with like, people of higher status than you, and then you would, not automatically become.
It rubs off.
So yeah, it sort of rubs off on you. I have a friend who used to say, I just go to really expensive bars and,
yes,
I just work from there. And then I can, maybe strike up a conversation with someone who's
yeah, but then you just leave with an £80 bill and you've only paid for coffee. But
I the network though, so it's kind of like I'm trying to build my network. I'm trying to. Like,
but you see, that's not friendship.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, it's not.
Friendship. That I totally get. One really interesting piece of research was that men and this is particularly to men that have richer friends than them are more likely to take financial risk and buy things they can't afford. So they actually put themselves in financial precarity to sort of match their group. You're nodding, Tam.
I'm thinking of one person in particular right
Oh,
now.
really?
Yeah, it's kind of like fake it till you make it, right?
Fake it till you make it. Yeah, but like, that's not friendship. That's not friendship. But, anyway, there is such a difference. And I think there's a lot of there's also like a really big trend right now of women seeing female friendship as actually a stronger bond, a more reliable source, a more sort of accepting sphere than heterosexual relationships. And I think you're really seeing female friendship in particular sort of celebrated and lauded in a way that previously I think had been characterized as bitchy, competitive, and sort of in a negative light, which is really good because I couldn't survive without my friends. So I think one of the things that I was really thinking about as I was writing this piece was this this kind of Thatcherite materialism that came of age in the 1980s. I remember my parents had friends that were obsessed with their new kitchens and their new house and like their big car, and it was all like flash, 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 flash.
I hope you don't mind me interrupting, but I couldn't help noticing that we appear to be considerably richer than you.
I doubt it, mate.
I beg your pardon, mate.
I said I doubt that you're richer than me.
Ah, bog off, of course we are, look at you.
No, I think not.
All right, then how much money you got?
Look, I don't really want to talk about this, actually. It's a bit vulgar.
OK, man. Have it your own way. Fair enough. Let's forget the money. How big's your house?
I think there's different status games happening with the Millennials and Gen Z. And I think we slightly sneer at that sort of vulgar materialism. But I think there's a different kind of status within friendship groups. It's not about who's got the most money. Quite often now it's about who's got the most freedom, who's got the most creative career, who's got the most time with their children, who's got the best holidays. Health, for example, is a big, massive status game. You can see this in the manosphere, right? It's all about pecs as well as decks. Like it's sort of like that. What constitutes wealth and success now is about health, is about freedom, is about creativity, is about time. I think there's a massive thing about I have time. Eugene Healy, who's, if you don't follow him, is brilliant on all of this, is like the new status games of like sleep and multiple children, and it's just like weird status indicators in 21st century that just weren't there when our parents were playing How Big's My Kitchen or Car, right? But anyway, I digress, because at the heart of all of this is at a time of a loneliness epidemic, and at a time of optimization and productivity and everyone being judged by their output. I think friendship is the sphere in which all of that shit should dissolve and not matter. And it's not about having a lot of friends. It's not about having, but it's about having deep friendships. And I think all that said, we can't deny that money, more than ever, is something that might have to be a taboo broken and spoken about within friendship groups. This does not speak to me at all. My friends are my friends, money doesn't come into it. Well, that's great. But are you being completely honest there? Because I think what I'm trying to do and in this piece and right now is kind of break that taboo around friendship and money that I think has become more and more problematic. I think also admit that we don't have as many cross class friendships as we did, and also recognize that it is a taboo that maybe needs to be broken and the unspoken actually said. So one of the things that I look to, and this is a uniquely female thing I think, but the example of my mother, who throughout her life has been absolutely amazing at maintaining and nurturing friendships, and she now in her 80s is almost kind of casually living in a female commune, because she has so many of her friends come to visit her in London and have extended stays. Many of them leave suitcases in her house. She's constantly got this carousel of women who are very much liberated from domesticity. Many of them, most of them, in fact, are widows, very much enjoying London life in their 80s, but also very much enjoying a sort of that friendship in your fuck it years, where they can say anything, they can do anything with each other, and being around them is one of the most joyous experiences, because they are just constantly laughing at each other. Now, many of these women have had very different life trajectories, and very different financial trajectories, but to sit and have the ability to sit in a room with 4 or 5 women in their 70s and 80s laughing until not they wee themselves, but laughing so much until tears come is just, I think, one of the great joys of life. And I don't think that it's just a really brilliant example that I see of friendship, yes, but a kind of friendship bond where the status games that potentially preoccupy earlier decades of our lives really doesn't fucking matter. That's it for this week. Thank you so much. Do go and read the original essay, and also, just go and hang out with all your friends. It could be work, but does that friendship exist out of that job? I think it's quite interesting. I mean, because a lot of friends just sit around, work friends sit around and slag off the boss. Yeah, and that's what unites them. But then when they leave work or change that job, like, are they still friends?
I have quite a few friends from my
previous jobs.
Like from my first ever job, actually, I was still good friends.
I just want to reassure everyone, Damon and I are very good friends. But it's the friendship thing is so interesting, because I think when people say friendship is in decline, we can talk about the arenas in which people used to make friends, associational sports and clubs and churches and work, obviously, have all declined as a place and a space where you have the time to invest in friendships has declined. But I think it's also because we're all in we've been corrupted by a capitalist narrative of optimization and output and being productive. and the declining rewards of that optimization, which means many people are switching off. But like, you can't optimize a friendship. No, you can't be a productive friend. I mean, you can be a responsive friend, but like productivity hacks for friendship doesn't work. Productivity hacks for dating does, right? I mean, dating relationships very different. But I think the reason why friendship is declined is not just the spaces, it's how people think about how they spend their time. What is the most productive? Sitting around getting drunk with your friends is not very productive.
And I think maybe that's where we sort of fall off, because now I think we're trying to define everything based on productivity. So it's like, well, I just spent 2 hours with James, and then I could have been doing this instead.
What's the outcomes? But then, of course, it is. I think there's also a kind of like swing against that in culture, where it's like the anti-optimization of culture and actually kind of switching off, unplugging and zoning out, deliberately, self-consciously, and most obviously within Gen Z. Anyway.